G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Now today I have a much promised pattern of this little bunny. Now you may have seen this little bunny featured in one of my other videos called some simple needle felting techniques, where we did a little bit of work on that eye, and I think you will enjoy seeing her and really requested this pattern. So I've gone ahead and put it together for you, and I think it's probably right at the right time, just in time for Easter, because wouldn't this make the perfect little Easter bunny gift? And I have your free pattern templates all ready for you. Now you'll find those in the description box below the video, and I'll also put it number 1 in the comments as well. Now you just find that link. If you click on that link, you can open that up and you'll be able to print out those pattern templates on your own home printer. Now before you do that, my advice is first of all that you download with Google Chrome, and also that you set your printer to print at actual size in the settings, so that all of your pattern templates are the right size, and that's very important. Now remember that I always include all seam allowances in my patterns. Makes it absolutely so much easier for everybody. So let's get busy making our little Easter bunny. Let's start with what we're going to need to create our little bunny here today. And first of all, let me say that I have designed this one specifically to be made up in felt for a couple of reasons. And that is the way that we do our closings, we need a non-fray edge. And also with those little ears there, we need a non-fray edge to create a nice neat little ear that tucks into that seam. You could, if you do decide to go ahead and make it in fabric, just realise that this edge, you'll have some fraying there. Even though it will be blanket stitched, you will have some fraying. You won't have such a neat little finish. So I highly recommend that you make it up in felt. And also, because we're going to be doing some little detailing, some needle felting detailing around that eye, we really do need it to be felt into felt. To make that possible. That is optional, that little piece that we're going to do, but it's just something to remember. So best advice is make it up in felt. I've got a lovely grey here that I'm going to be using this time. Now I have my 2 body pieces here, and they are interfaced with my favourite woven fusible cotton interfacing, and that makes it very stable. You definitely need to interface this little project. So there's our 2 body pieces. We have then our centre gusset for our body, and that is made up in a contrasting colour. And I'm making mine up to be quite realistic in style. So I've got that little off-white there that we're going to follow through with throughout. So that's your centre gusset, and then we're going to need our little foot pieces, and I have cut them to have a little under colour of that off-white showing, and that's the little back feet there. So 2 of those, and we're also going to need our front inner leg pieces, and they have to be cut from the same colour as your body piece. All these pieces have that same interfacing applied. Also we have our 2 little foot pads that go in our little front feet there. And then we're going to need a little tail, which is actually just a little heart. And I like to use those 2 colours again to have that little pop of colour. We're also going to need a button to attach that one. I just carry on with that theme and use a little heart button there. And then we go on to our head pieces. So our head pieces, our front head gusset and our back head gusset, our little ears are going to be inserted in between here. We also need our side head pieces, and they are also cut in the grey and also have that interfacing applied. And then we have our side face pieces, and they are that contrasting colour, so we get that real nice realistic little look there. And then we're going to be adding our little eye pieces. These are just felt with fusible webbing applied. The reason for that is it holds that little eyelid together well with that bit of bonding on the back. Also makes it much easier for you to cut a clean shape out because you've got that paper on the back. So make sure that when you cut those out, I recommend that you cut out the center piece first because you've got more to hold on to then, and then cut out the rest and just use your very tiny scissors to do that middle section there. And of course you're going to need your ear pieces, so you need 2 of your ears. Now these are cut from double felt. Double felt is just 2 pieces of felt joined together with fusible webbing, and I usually make up a piece and then I cut my shapes from that. I'm going to put a link up the top there that shows you how to create double felt there. It's actually a video of mine that talks about preparing felt for sewing, so that might help you out if you haven't made it before. So this is going to be our completed ears, so obviously you need 2 of those. And then we have our little neck adornment. Now I'm putting this lovely little flower around her neck. These are also cut from double felt, and you can see that I've cut them from a light pink and a dark pink. It's so that we can layer that and get those 2 great colours. I'm going to be blanket stitching around the entire edge of that and joining that through the neck joint. Now if you feel you want to make the process a bit quicker, because I guess there's a fair bit of blanket stitching in this one, not that you have to blanket stitch that edge, I just think it's a lovely finish. You could go ahead and just put, if this is an Easter bunny, just a great big bow would be lovely around her neck, or perhaps you could create a little neck ruffle and bring the fabric in that way. I've got a video that actually shows you how to make this little neck ruffle, and that will work really well on this project. Very, very sweet, that little ruffle around the neck there, and you could coordinate the colours. So that's another option for you. Now speaking of joining that head, we're going to be needing a neck joint in this project. Now I make my own joints, and I do also have a video that shows you how to do that. I'm going to put that link up there also, and you can have a look at those. You could, if you are a bear maker or just a soft toy maker and you work with joints all the time, you've probably got your own, and that's fine. You can go ahead and use those. Perhaps you could use a cotter pin joint. I'm going to be talking to you about cotter pin joints in the future, and we're going to do a little demonstration of those. But for now I have this one, and I'm using a longer bolt with this one. It's not your standard 1-inch bolt, it's just a little bit longer than that, because we're going to be going through several layers and putting those little petal circles in between them. So we need that bolt to be that little bit longer. And that is a 30mm disc that I'm using there. And we'll also need some eyes. So I'm using Glass Premium Teddy Bear eyes here. I'm going for the blue because that will work with the grey with the little surrounds around it. If you don't want the expense of the teddy bear glass eyes, you can go ahead and use perhaps just a dark button, but it needs to be a button that is a shank button, so it has something to pull the thread through, and we can pull those into the head, because we do need, with this project, we need to be able to add the eyes after the head is filled and get that nice pull in of those eyes to get that little realistic look. And these are 12mm, those eyes, and so your button needs to be about that too, to suit that little eye surround we're doing. Speaking of that eye surround, you'll need some wool felting needles. A lot of you may have probably about a 36, which I use for packing filling. We'll need that throughout anyway to help us pack our fibres in. If you've got a smaller one, this one is a 40 for finer work, that's good too. That will help us when we do this bit of detailing around that eye there. Now remember, I said that was optional, and of course it is. You can just add your eyes and perhaps do just a little bit of shading around it. That will work well. For our shading, I'm going to be using my Artist Soft Pastels. I've got them in a pencil form, and I soften it off with a brush there. Alternatively, you can just use your standard Artist Soft Pastels, which are a chalk dry pastel. They are not an oil pastel, and it's just about blending some of those colours into that felt, which is another reason why we use felt, because we can do that. And I think that's about it. Just our threads, our pearl threads. You'll need extra strong thread for your construction. I'm using extra strong thread throughout for some embroidery as well. And that's about it. Polyester filling to fill. And I think that has the lot. So our very first step in this project is we need to prepare our little ears. You can see I've got my 2 there all done, and what I've done is blanket stitched around the entire edge of that ear. It is just a lovely finish. If you can alternatively with these ears, you could, instead of making up in double felt, you could have felt fused with a print fabric. So a pretty print here for the inside of the ear would still work with this project because you've still got the felt behind it. So have a think about that. I just am staying with the felt. So I've got my needle with a single thread of extra strong thread in a deeper grey, and the base of this ear will not be seen. It's going to go into the seam, so we can hide our knot at the base there. And we've come out, so the blanket stitch, it's a very standard stitch. I've got a video also that shows you how to sew that one. Put the link up the top for you. But what we're going to do is keep our stitches quite small here, probably only about 2 to 3 millimeters. Blanket stitch, you go through both of your layers and we come out through that loop. Bring your needle out through that loop. That's our first stitch done. Keep our stitches nice and even through both layers again, and you can see that that needle is coming out through that loop there. Pull that one up, and that's what gives us that little stitch that goes across the top there. That's the one that binds that edge, stops any fraying, and it just gives a really great finish to this project. So you can see that that's all I'm going to need to do all the way around that little ear. Once I have done that, I'm going to fold that little ear in on itself, so into the pink section, and I'm just going to tack that base together just as I have here, and then those ears are all ready to tuck into that seam that we're going to make in that head gusset. So that's your first step, just to prepare those little ears ready to go into that little head. Next step is that we're going to actually tack our little ears into place on our front little head gusset there. So we're just going to lay them flat. You can give them a good squeeze so that they're nice and flat. You've got them stitched at the base there. And we're going to just tack them into place. Now our seam allowances are 4 millimeters throughout this project. So remember, we need to go not deeper than that. But it does help a lot to have them in position, because then we're going to be adding our other piece over the top, and we're going to be stitching that seam, and those little ears are going to be in the middle, and that's how they're situated. Now we put them in that very realistic way. Bunny's ears, you don't see the front of them, they're actually the little open part is at the side. So you want to have your insides of your ears pointing outwards and the closed parts in the middle, and you want to have just a little bit of space between those 2 little ears in the middle. It's probably 2 millimeters, that's all. And then we've got some space either side, because we're going to be sewing a seam on the side there, so we need room there. So yes, it's a tight fit. But it needs to be so that we get that nice, very realistic effect. You can see that you've still got room on the sides there and a little bit of space right in the middle there. So the ears aren't touching in the center, just a little bit further apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just hand stitch those 2 little ears into place, and then I'm going to add my back gusset. And I'm going to also tack that into place before I sew that seam 2 times on the machine, keeping it to 4 millimeters, and make sure that you really back and forth over those ear sections so that they're really well incorporated. And I have my machine stitch length set at number 2, so it's a nice small little stitch. There you can see I have my seam sewn, and then when we just turn that through, we've got our little ears nicely set there in between that seam. Just check that they are nicely incorporated, that you haven't missed any, and we can just pop that one aside for now. And now we're going to add our little side muzzle pieces, and this is our little neck edge here, and this is our little neck edge here, and we're just going to line up those two edges, and the points will extend just beyond so that it works for our seam allowance. So we're just going to line that up, and you're just going to stitch along 2 times again. And I'm using a jeans needle in my machine throughout this because it's fairly thick pieces to get through. So just repeat with that one. So just right sides together and stitch down both of those seams 2 times. And once you have those 2 little pieces sewn into place there, what I want you to do is press those seams forward, so towards the little nose area. Really press that seam out, and make sure that you do the same on the other side. And you might notice throughout this project that you'll see that before I stitch most of my seams, I will always do it by hand first with a little overcasting stitch. You don't have to do that, but I have made literally thousands of collectibles, and this is what I do every time. And I can guarantee you that sewing a little tacking stitch first is going to save you more time than having to deal with little pieces that have shifted afterwards. So I just care about every single stitch, and it really shows in your finished project. So I've got those nicely pressed forward there, and so now I'm going to put right sides together again, my 2 completed little sides, and my next seam is that front seam of the face. So from the tip of the nose there, the same 4mm seam down to the base of the neck. Again, I'm going to overcast it first by hand, and then I'm going to stitch it twice on the machine. Once you have that seam stitched, now this is one of the few times where I go ahead and I remove my tacking stitch from this front seam. So I've pulled that one out. My reason for that is I want to be able to flatten that little seam out. Once I've done that, I just pop that through, turn it through the right way, and just make sure that I've really rolled out that seam and that it's all nice and even there as it is. Pop that one back through, and because we've got that seam nice and open and flat there, we're now going to add, and this is probably one of the most challenging parts of sewing anything in soft sculpture, is popping in a nose gusset, but I'm going to show you step by step how. So we've got a little mark, and make sure you do transfer all of your marks from your pattern, and we're going to line that mark up, just have that point extend just a little, and we're going to line it up with the center of that seam that we've opened up. And we want to take a pin and go right straight through that seam. You can see there, and that's just the pin all the way through and the pin head down. So my next step is to start to wrap one side, keeping my little pin centered there. I'm going to start to wrap that side head piece around that front head gusset. I'm going to take my pin, I'm going to go through both of the layers, I'm going to flip it over and take some of that underneath fabric only, and push my pin head all the way down so that the pin is holding it down like that. I'm going to go to the other side and repeat the same. So it's all about the pinning in this process that keeps it all nice and even. You can see I've lined up that edge again, put my pin through both, flip it over, take a little bit on that side muzzle piece, my pin head all the way down. And you want to be checking that it's nice and even. that you haven't gathered up too much this side and that it's uneven. And you can check that by looking at your side pieces here. And I can see that I'm a little bit lower here than I am there. So I will just adjust that slightly by pushing that one in more, pulling that one down, my pin through. It's very important to get these sections right. So now I'm going to go back over to the other side, continue with my lining up, remembering that that seam, we want it to be pressed forward. So we keep encouraging that forward. Take that pin, back to the other side, and do the same there. And we're starting to get that little 3D look of that little front nose section there. And that's the best way to pin anything in 3D. Now what you'll go ahead and do, now I like to extend those pins, and I will pin, I guess it's around about 1.5 centimeters from this seam here either side, making sure that it's all nice and even. Once I've done that, I'm going to take my tacking thread again, and I'm just going to overcast that little section into place just to there. We can leave this for now, and I'm going to get that one all stitched into place, and then I can remove my pins. There you can see I've got that little section just all stitched into place. So now my pins are gone, so it's not going to be difficult to actually sew my seam. This section I sew in by hand always, whatever I'm making. I sew it in by hand using a stab back stitch. So I've got my extra strong thread, which is what you need, and I start up exactly where I finished off there, and I'm going to put a video link up the top there for you of how to sew the stab back stitch. I'm going to show you a couple here. Now, stab back stitch is a fully linked stitch that we use for teddy bear making, soft toy and soft sculpture, because it's the strongest stitch for hand sewing a seam. So I've got a knot in the end of my single thread, and I'm just going to start in my 4mm seam allowance, come in from behind, and I'm going to take my first stitch, which is quite small, so it's nice and strong. I'm going to go backtrack and just go straight over that stitch again. So that has my first stitch in place. Now I'm going to come in from behind and just travel down just the length of one stitch. Pull that one through, and I'm going to go back in to my exit spot that I just came out of, pulling it nice and firm. From the underneath again, travelling down. So we stitch from behind, but we're pulling the needle all the way through and back again each time. That way we keep the stitch nice and straight and stable, and there's no slipping in the fabric. So back into that exit hole, and you can see that the stitch is just completely linked. Once you've done a few of these, I've sewn 4 foot bears fully by hand in mohair with this stitch, no sewing machine, so you can get quite quick at it, trust me. So there you go, you can see a really neat seam that you can make just as straight as you can on the machine, but you've got all the control because you're doing it by hand. So practice makes perfect with this stitch for sure, but it's well worth the effort, because this section of your little animal here is usually the first thing that you see, and you want that to be all nice and balanced and even. So I'm going to continue on with that one and actually stitch that seam. Make sure when you get to the center here that you really lock in that center with that center seam. So I'm going to stitch all the way around back to my other point and then cast off. I'm fully aware that I'm sounding very old when I talk about the olden days of hand stitching all of my bears, as my grandpappy, all reliable, used to say. But it is still the best way to sew in these really tricky little parts, and this front nose section here is a key point on all bears and stuffed animals. So you can see there that little seam is stitched into place now, and we can just pop that one through and we can just check on our sewing, and we've got a lovely little clean, neat little front there. And now we know that that little front section of our face is all perfectly in place. So we can pop that one back out again. And now all we need to do is continue on, keeping those ears out of the way. We're going to continue with our pins, pinning in the same way through both layers and just taking up some on the underside. When you get to this section where that ear is, you really need to make sure that ear is not in the way. Remember, you've only got a little bit of space there for that seam. Tuck that out of the way, and we're going to do the same thing. So we're just going to pin those, and I do one side at a time. And if you followed your seam allowances carefully, your 4mm seam allowance, you'll find that that little edge will line up and meet up beautifully with the base of your neck edge. So just ease it as you go. If you get to the bottom and you've got a little bit of an overlap, pull your pins out and just do a little bit of easing as you go, and you will be right. But if your 4mm seam allowance is good all throughout, you'll find that will fit beautifully. So I will pin and overcast that one just as I did before. Now this section you can usually get under the machine. So you can start here and machine from this spot, make sure that you overlap a little and stitch all the way down to that neck edge, as we have been doing 2 times. Once you've done that, you just repeat with the other side. Now notice that throughout this, constructing this little head, I'm working and doing all of my sewing and stitching and pinning on the head gusset. I'm not doing it this way. I'm not sewing from this way. And it's very important that you do that, because that's what gives you that balanced little head. If you do something different on this side than you do on this side, you'll get twisting and turning in that little head. So all of your work, remember, do it on the head gusset. So flip it over and do the same the other side, and get that whole head section stitched into place. Once you've got your little head seams all sewn, you can just turn that head through as I have there, and you want to take your time and roll out all of those seams. Make sure they're really rolled out, especially on those little junctions there. And here either side of the ears, and you've got your nice little bunny head. So our next step is we're going to start filling. So easiest way is with forceps if you have them, and we're just going to pack this little head nice and firm, as I always recommend. A firmer head is much easier to work with, and we're going to keep adding that filling. And as you do so, make sure start with the top of the head and then work your way and fill out that front of that muzzle. We're going to be sewing that little mouth line in there, and we don't want it caving in, so we want it nice and firm. As you're doing that, once you get that little front section packed out there, get in there with your, if you have a wool felting needle, and you can pack those fibres in as you go, and that way that filling won't pop back out at you. So keep packing it in until that little head is really nice and solid. You can see here there's not much give in that at all. Just fill it till just a little way from the base here, and again use your felting needle to pack that in. I'll show you what that looks like, and then we will be ready to pop in our little neck joint. So there you can see that has that little head filled out nicely. It's nice and firm right down to the muzzle there. And then I've gone ahead and taken a double strand of my extra strong thread. I've started at the back there and left my tail ends hanging, and I've just sewn a close little running stitch just about 5mm from the edge there, and come out the back there as well. Left my tail ends hanging so I can tie that one off. You can also see that I've used my wool felting needle to pack that all nice and flat there. So now we take the top part of our little joint and we're just going to slip that one in there, and all we need to do is pull those gathers in around, tie off our first knot. I've left my needle on because I'm going to sew around that again just to be sure, and it is just a matter of making sure that that little joint, that little bolt is centered. You want to push it all in and keep tugging that one in until your fabric has come right up around that little bolt, and then knot that one off at least 4 times. So once we have that neck joint securely into place there, our next step is to choose our eye position. Now I want you to have a good look at where I have these eyes popped in here. I'm using little teddy bear tester eyes, and they're just a glass eye on a pin. It just helps you with positioning. So, and you can see that I've got my position marked, and of course those little eyes will be pulled in. So we will get that little pulled in effect there. And it is just not in line with the ear. It's a little before the ear. Just have a good look at where that positioning is. And you want to make sure that they're even either side. So you can do this just with glass head pins or ball head pins. Make sure that you check from every angle to make sure that they're in exactly the right position. Once you have that, you can go ahead and make a hole, a mark and a hole with your awl. I want you to take that awl, take it in that hole and direct it down to the back base of the head. We're just making a little channel there so that they both go in that same kind of direction. Push that one down to the back of the head because that's how our needle's going to go in. And our next step is to take your button with its shank or your glass eye with its shank, and we're going to take a doubled strand of extra strong thread. So there's my doubled long strand. I'm going to double it again. So now I've got 4 strands. That little loop section I'm going to take through the shank, take that through, open up that little loop and take my ends back through, and that's going to secure that little eye with those 4 strands of extra strong thread. I've got this one set up with the ends trimmed. So now I'm going to take I'm using my largest doll needle here, take those little ends through, and we're ready to add our first eye. So what we're going to do is just simply dive into that hole on one side. We're going to try and follow that same sort of channel and come out at the base of the head at the back there and push that needle all the way through. I'm going to pull that little eye in. You want to make sure that that shank has gone properly into that hole and give it a good tug. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be pulling that eye right in. Remember that we're also going to be putting that ice around it. So once you've got that one into position, it's a good idea to pull those threads aside and just enlarge that hole just a little bit, that exit hole. Just make it a little bit bigger, because what we're going to do now is we're going to take that second eye on a needle, exactly the same. We're going to go in this side, we're going to take that needle through, and we're going to come out through exactly the same hole on the other side. So now I have both of those eyes in and coming out both through that same hole. You see I've got those 2 groups of 4 threads there, and all I've done is tied an initial first knot, pulled that in and given those eyes a nice squeeze. So you just want to push those eyes in, make sure that they're nice and even, and while you've got a hold of them, this is best done off camera, which I will do. Really pull those eyes in, give that knot a nice tug, check that both the eyes are pulled in evenly each side, hold on to them knot that one off at least 4 times, and make sure always pull them a little tighter than what you want them to actually be, because they will always just slacken off slightly. So I'm going to get those all knotted off, and then I'm going to re-thread my ends, take them back into that hole with my needle and out somewhere at the back of the head and snip those thread ends to hide that little knot. So there you can see that has those eyes in place, and our next step is we're going to sew in our little nose and mouth details. So I've gone to my medium-sized doll needle here, and I have a double thread. I'm using 8-ply pearl thread. I've got a knot in the end, but I've put the 2 cut ends through the eye of the needle. The reason for that is if we make a little mistake or get something uneven here, we're able to get our needle off to be able to pull it out and rethread. We won't have to start all over again, if that makes sense. So where I've come out is I've just gone in from behind. We're going to hide that knot by using our awl, and I'm probably just about 1 centimetre from the very base of that nose, and I'm right straight through the middle of that seam. You can take it a little shorter if you like, and we're going to pull that one all the way through. And once we get to that where that knot is at the back, we're just going to enlarge that little hole just so that we can pull that knot through, and it will be hidden and it will hold on the other side. So my next step is to pull those threads up. I'm going to make sure that they're not twisted in any way, and I'm going to go in right at that point there, and I'm going to come out a little way up the side. It'll be easier for you to see on this one. So I've dived in and I've come out on one side there, which I'm going to do now. Tuck that needle in. You can see why it needs to be nice and firm. You just want to travel up a little way right on that edge there. Pull that one through. Again, making sure that those threads are straight as they go in. Pull those in nice and firm. And what we're going to do now is we're going to come around and up the other side, but we're going to tuck our needle under. So we're not going through any fabric here, we're just tucking our needle under those stitches without catching anything. Make sure that that's still nice and pulled in. And I'm going to pull that taut. Again, we're going to watch that our stitches are nice and straight as they go around under. Pull that one in, and we're going to match that up on the other side. And we're going to dive in, and now we're going to come out at the edge of our little mouth where we want our little smile to end there. That can be as wide or as little as you like. You can give it a little test by taking your thread and wrapping it around and having a little look at that and seeing how that will look. So I think I might need to go a little bit lower there. And again, pull that one through, making sure that those stitches are straight as they tuck in there. We're going to be doing a bit of shading on this little bunny also. Don't be afraid to give it a pull and a tug and manipulate those stitches. Pull those nice and tight. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go up and under those threads again. Again, being careful not to actually catch anything. Sometimes easier said than done. Make sure you're under both. Pull that needle through. Check those threads are straight again. Keep the tension up. And then we're going to match it up on the other side. So there you can see, because I've kept that tension up, we've got some nice pull in there, a little bit of sculpting there. I'm going to dive in that side. I'm going to come out at the back of the head, and I can knot off at the base here and just hide those little knots. So now you can see we have our sweet little bunny smile all in place. Our next step is we're going to go ahead and we're going to do our little eye circles, which is going to involve a little bit of what I call flat needle felting. So I've got my little eye patch ready, and I'm going to take off that backing fabric of that fusible webbing, and we're just going to place it over that eye. Now you want to direct the corner, because this is a little ellipse shape, the corner, you want to face it, line it up with the corner here. So we're going to just hold that in place, and then we start. I've actually shown you this on another video, my simple needle felting techniques video, which will probably show you a lot more detail, but I'm going to run you through it again. So what we're going to do is now felting needles take fibres in when you push in, but they don't pull them out. So that's how they work. So we can push that felting needle in, and it's taken some fibres from here, pushed it into here, and then as I pull that needle out, it's not drawing them out again. So what we're going to do is, first of all, just use our heavier weight needle just to start anchoring that one into place. You might feel like you're not getting anywhere to begin with, but you just keep tapping away with that needle. You can take your finer needle if you like, and you can do it with that one. It's just a matter of getting it positioned exactly right over that eye. You can see that I'm tucking it in around that little shape there. Do mind your fingers, because I've said before, you'll only catch yourself once. They're very, very sharp. So you can see it's just locking in those fibres. Once you've got it all settled all the way around, it's easier, because then you can just stab away. It's very therapeutic. You see it's just positioning that little circle in place. So there it is, and it's sitting there now. So now I can just work on it. And all I need to do is go ahead and continue to stab and felt away until that little eye patch is almost at one with the felt behind it. So maybe perhaps start with the finer needle, unless you're used to needle felting. I'm thinking my larger needle's probably a bit blunt too. I'll drag out one of my new ones. So you can see there, I'm just tapping away, and I'm going to pay particular attention to those edges so that I get a nice blended edge. And also I'm going to put in my detailing by really securing those eye corners into place, and that little line over the eye there. So I'm going to just keep tapping away there for a while, and I'll show you how that looks. And there you go, you can see, hopefully you can see that there, that I've just worked at that. And make sure when you're felting that you're taking your needle in all directions, particularly on that edge. So you're going outwards, and then you're also felting inwards. And so that's really, really going to be all just at one with the fabric below it. You can also see that I've then taken my needle and I've just gone and created that little indentation to give some definition over that little eyelid. So now we've got a defined little eyelid that sits over the top of that eye there. Hope you can see that. Now the good thing about felting like this is you can always come back and stab away at it again. This one is a very, very old little project. It's probably about 8 years old, and I can just go back and I can just tidy up. So you can see there just how perfectly sealed that is there now. We are going to be adding a bit of shading there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly the same thing and add that second eye patch. Do make sure that you're lining it up in the same way as we did so that the angles are all right. So I'm going to get that second one in place. Right, so I have both of my little eye circles all nicely needle felted into place now. I've got some nice definition there. And next step is to do a little bit of shading. Now a lot of people are frightened of shading. The best thing I can tell you is just a very light touch. So you can always, it's like cutting hair, you can always take more off, but you can't stick it back on. And with this, you know, you can always add more, but you can't take it off. This is a permanent pigment, and it's very strong, but it works beautifully with felt. So it's just a matter of, I find the pencils are really good. If you can't get a hold of the pencils, you can use something like a very fine, this is a little brow brush. So you can take your little sticks of pastels and you can take some colour up on that, and you can work your way that way, adding your colour that way. It's a good little slanted brush like that, works really well. Because I've got my little pencils, I can actually go ahead and define. You can see I'm going to define that corner and then that little across the top of that eye line there. And I'm just going to do it just very gently, and then I can work it in also with my brush. So it's really just about adding it bit by bit. And you can see that as you do that, it just brings your little bunny to life. Just the simplest little thing. So we leave a little white rim, and it just makes those eyes really pop. Hope you can see that happening there already. Just a few little strokes, it doesn't take much. And the other area that I like to highlight too is I'll work around that edge there where the two colours join and really just blend that edge. So it stops it being so start and finish. It's just that nice little bit of blending. Now of course as you go you can be using your brush just to soften that off and blend that all in, and you'll end up with a beautiful realistic look. The other thing that you can do is to take up some colour on your softer brush, and we can do some colour work up between the ears here. So I'm going to take my, don't think my grey is going to be dark enough, but we'll give it a go. So I'm just taking some colour up. I very rarely use the sticks directly on a small project, and it takes a little while to build up some colour, but we're just going to just add some depth between those ears there. And the other section that I like to do is the little nose and mouth area, and it's just a minimal amount, but we just add some colour to the tip of the nose and just outline underneath that little mouth area. And I can go ahead and do that again with my pencil. And again, it's really surprising the difference that it makes for very little effort. And you can see you really don't need to be afraid of it. And soft pastels are great to work with because they are so gentle. So just going to define the underneath of that lip line. See that I'm doing there. And again, a little bit of it at a time. Have a look at it. blend those lines, and you can add as little or as much as you like, and we will end up with a lovely realistic little head. So I'm going to continue on, have a little play with that. You can do the interior, just the little inside part of those ears, because anything that you make darker sends it back further. So I'll just add a little hint of shadow in there in each ear, and then I'll show you how that looks. So that has my shading all completed on my little bunny there. And you see it's just given it such a lovely little realistic look. And so that's all I need to do for up to this stage on the head. So we can pop that little head aside. Just if you're not going to be adding those little eye circles, you can go ahead and just add, you can see there, just a little bit of shading around that eye. It still makes all the difference because it really sets that eye back into the head. And you can see a little bit of shading there, a little bit around the mouth, and that works really well. So do make sure before you move on that you wash your hands, because that that pastel will transfer. So now we're going to move ahead and we're going to start work on our body. So we're going to begin with our center body gusset and one of our little front inside legs. So the curves, the seam that we're going to be sewing is this curve to this curve. So we have to make that fit. So what we're going to do is have right sides together, make sure the toes are pointing towards the top of the gusset, because this is the back, so the toes need to point forward. And we're going to start by matching up these two corners. You want that little inner leg to just extend, that point will extend slightly. And we're going to put our pin in just as we did before, through both layers, flip it over and take a little bit of that underside. I'm going to move around a little, so I'm just matching up those two edges. Pin through the other side. Pull those edges around to meet and you'll see that they will line up. So even though they're different shapes, they will meet up beautifully. And what we do from there is we're going to take our extra strong thread, and first of all I'm going to overcast to tack it into place so that I can remove those pins, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew that same back stitch, the stab back stitch that we used when we were sewing that little muzzle section in. And that will sew that one in nice and securely. Once you have that one in, you're just going to do exactly the same with the other side. Now make sure you'll see again that where I'm working from is the center gusset. I'm not sewing from this pattern piece. I'm sewing, doing all of my work, my pinning and my sewing on the center gusset. So you'll go ahead and repeat with the other side, and you should have both of those little toes pointing forwards. Okay, so there I have my two little inner legs stitched in. You can see there into that center body gusset piece. So our next step is we start to add our little side panels, and we're going to be sewing our front toe to the front of the side gusset, of the center gusset, sorry. And what we're going to do is have right sides together, and we're going to line up first of all that little foot section. Now this one you can do with clips or pins, whatever you like, because we're just going to pin in the normal way. And you want to push that seam downwards as you do that. So push it nice and flat and facing downwards. It helps turn that little leg in, and you'll find that that edge will line up with the top neck edge there. Just curve that round to fit. That's why it's so important to stay with your seam allowances so that everything does match up. And that one at the top there. And you'll notice that I've changed now, and now my work is being done from the side panel. I'm not doing that from the center panel now. I'm doing it from the side panel. So now I'm going to simply overcast and machine stitch 2 times that front seam, and once I've done that one, I then just repeat the process with the other side, lining up the toe first, keeping that seam pushed down, working from the side panel, and I will stitch that front seam 2 times. So that has my 2 side body pieces stitched into place there. Put that one back through, and our next step is we're going to, still working on those side panels, we're going to line up the back of those little front legs there. Make sure that you pin or clip right on that starting point there, and just pull that seam nice and open, and it will line up exactly with that junction of that seam. So I will go ahead and I will just sew an overcasting stitch as usual, just to keep that in place, and then stitch that 2 times on the machine, and then flip it over and do exactly the same thing with the other side. We now have those little front legs all stitched into place there. So now our next step is we're going to sew this center back seam right from the top of that neck edge. Again, clip or pin all the way down, right down the back, line up that little base, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to overcast that first and then sew that one 2 times. Once I have that back seam stitched, I remove just some of my little tacking stitches here, once that's done, so that I can flatten out that seam. I want to open that seam out, and now I take my little base piece, and you've got a mark at the end of that little body gusset there. I'm going to take a pin straight through that mark, and I'm going to take my pin straight through that seam there, right in the middle, just to anchor that one into place. We're not stitching that part right now, but that's going to help us line it all up. And make sure that's nicely centered. Now on your pattern pieces also, you'll have little marks either side that you have hopefully transferred. And our next step, now notice I'm working from the gusset. I've switched over and I'm now working from the gusset, and I'm now going to pin. This time you can pin it in the usual way. I'm going to pin just to that mark, and that's going to be my stitching stop point on each side. I'm going to do the same with the other side, pulling those edges up to meet up. Now I generally just sew these 2 sections by hand, but you can, if you want to tuck it under the machine and you're comfortable doing that, you can definitely do that. So this little end section, we're not stitching because we're going to sew that in. That's going to be our opening for filling this little bunny. So we're going to leave this section open. So you just need to stitch, make sure you get right in there where your last stitches were, and you're just going to sew, whether you do it on the machine or by hand, just up to that little point. Make sure that you do it 2 times, and do make sure that you back and forth here and here, so that when we're working and stuffing, these 2 little seams are held well. There you can see my stitching completed either side. I've got that little opening there. That's where we will turn through and fill our little bunny. Our last step on this body is to add our little foot pads. And I know people can find this daunting. Practice makes perfect with these. These are quite small, but if you have followed your seam allowance well, you will find they will fit perfectly. So we're going to start. Now, the wider part of the foot pad is at the toe. And you've got two little marks there on your foot pad that you should have transferred over. Again, I've just removed a couple of those tacking stitches so that I can press those little seams flat. So I've put my needle through at my seam allowance on that little foot pad there, and I'm going to start by anchoring that little top section in straight through, lining it up straight through with that seam there. So push that one in. So it's all about the pinning with putting foot pads in. I probably need to do a video for you all that is just exactly that, how to sew in a foot pad. I need to get on with that. So now I've turned that around, and I'm putting my pin through my other mark, and I'm going to anchor that at the back at that same point, straight through. And once you've got those two in place, you'll find, keep them pushed right in, those pin heads pushed right in, you'll find that that little foot pad will fit in beautifully. You can see there. So that's a lovely little fit there. So now we're just going to pin in our 3D style, as I've shown you before, through both layers. Take up some on the other side. Push that pin head all the way down. Put as many in as you like. Remember to keep them pulled down into position. And then it is just a matter of going ahead and sewing with an overcast stitch first, and then that same hand stitch, that stab back stitch, to stitch those little foot pads into place. Make sure that you really anchor those little marks, line them up with the toes. So let me show you those little foot pads all stitched in there, in place. So that's our body. Now the last thing I've done there is I have just taken a doubled strand of extra strong thread, and I've sewn a gathering stitch around that neck edge right close to the edge, pulled that in and tied that off with just enough room to slip that bolt through of that little joint there. So our next step is just to turn this little one through. So it's just a simple process. Pull it all through, push those little feet through, and then we are going to push out all of those seams and really roll out all of those seams well. And there you can see I've got that little one all turned through and really gone around and rolled out those seams, and we've got that lovely little body there. So our next step is we need to have our little flower petal sections done, because we're going to sandwich them in between the body and the head. So I'm going to show you how I've done those. Very, very straightforward. So you've got your two pieces, and what I've done is I've taken my ruler and I have just ruled in the lines between all of those petal segments, just straight through. And then I've taken that to the machine and sewn 2 times back and forth, but I've stopped just before the center here, because we're going to be adding a fairly decent sized hole there, and we don't want to be going through all of that stitching. So once I had those all stitched into place, I then went around and just blanket stitched the entire edge, and I used my variegated pearl thread, and that's just come up really beautifully. Now remember to blanket stitch the right side, because this is the underside and my second piece is going to sit on top there like that. So next step then is to create that hole, which I've done with my awl, and then I'm just going to go ahead and enlarge with my knitting needle, and that will be ready to go through. I've got that one already done. The other thing that I do like to do, you can do, you don't have to do this, and that is I've got them lined up there so I can see, just to give you an idea, little bunny. You can check that out and you can see little bunny's head, just like that. And I like to position my petals to stay the way I want them to stay, so I don't want them twisting around. So I just drop a little bit of clear craft glue on there and position those petals the way I want them. I tend to want them to sit in between each one of the lower petals, but that's really just being fussy, but you can do that if you like. And then we've got that, so that's all ready to go through and attach to the body. However, before I do that, I like to fill the little front feet with a little bit of filling to start with, because it's just easier to get to them now before all that head and those petals are on. It's easier to get in there and push all of that filling in there. So I only fill them just about to the top here, and really make sure they're packed nice and full. And also try and get your wool felting needle in there and pack those little feet in, that filling in nice and tight. And that way, once we've got the head on and we go to fill that whole little body, it's much easier to just fill this section and you're not worried about the feet. So I'm going to go ahead and pack both of those little feet nice and firm. So that has those little front feet really packed nice and firm, and I've used my wool felting needle, so that's going to stay put while we add the little head. So I've got my corresponding disc, nut and washer ready for adding that little head. So I'm going to just first pop that little bolt through, and I'm going to decide where I want the front to sit there. And now I just have to pass that through that neck hole there. Come in underneath. And I just add my disc, my washer, and that nut. Now you might be using cotter pin joints. If you're using cotter pins, of course, you just do the same thing, only you're going to wind down those little tongs of that cotter pin joint. And it's just a matter of tightening that one up. And remember that all joints become more loose over time. So they slacken off because all those fibres keep compressing. So you always want to do your joints just a little more firm initially. So just check that you've got that all right. You've got no fabric caught up in that joint. And then all you need to do is take your spanner, whatever tool you're using, tighten that one up. Because I'm using my own joint system, once I've got that nice and tight, I will add a little drop of super glue in the thread of that little nut there, and that will hold really well. So whatever jointing method you're using, go ahead and finish that one off. And now all we have to do is go ahead and fill the rest of that little body. So we start, forceps is best for this, and we're going to start by filling in that neck area right up around that joint, and make sure that it's nice and firm and all filled out. And then we're going to continue to fill down. Now the areas you need to watch are that neck area, that's really nicely filled out, and as you start to fill this chest section, it's this little section here where the legs go into the body. Make sure that you pack that section nice and firm so that you don't get any kind of little divot in there. And we're going to continue on, and remember this back curve here, we want to make sure that there's no stops and starts in that, so nicely round it out as you go. And you can keep packing right up to the edge here, and you can be using your wool felting needle as you go, and we want to have this back section packed quite level with the top there. And you'll find it very simple if you use your wool felting needle. You can keep adding a little layer and tapping that all in, because we're going to then close that opening using a blanket stitch. So as flat and as firm as you can get it will be perfect. So make sure when you're filling that you're turning it around, checking it from every angle, and making sure that those little front legs are sitting nice and straight. So go ahead and get that one all fully filled out. And there I have that little bunny all filled out there. You can see that nice little curved back there, nice and strong through these areas, and those little feet nice and straight. And you see there's not much give in that at all. So now I've gone ahead and I have taken my felting needle and made that whole section nice and flat. You can see there, all tucked in nicely, and I can now put a pin through, as I did before, that very centre there. And through that centre, join there. You can put a clip there if you prefer. And I have taken my needle, which I have a single strand of my pearl thread, and I've just come in between those layers there, and I'm going to be sewing just a regular blanket stitch all the way around just to close that opening. I'm going to use the cream to coordinate, and it's probably best to use a colour that is of one of either of your two body colours there. And just make sure that you really do centre that one in, and keep your stitches nice and small so that we don't have any filling escaping, and that will have our little body all finished up. And that shows you there, that little closing all done. It's a nice neat closing. If you're wondering why I did it that way, it's because it's very, very difficult to do a ladder stitch closing on a very obvious curve like that and keep that beautiful perfect curve. And it's also much easier to sew an opening close with a blanket stitch than with an invisible ladder stitch. So that keeps us with all of those lovely curves, which makes this project look so sweet. So now that that's all done, our next step is to add our little feet. We've got a little back feet poking out. So this is what they look like. That's my first little one done with that little lighter underside, some little claws stitched in there. They're very simple. So we just take our two pieces, our two different colours, and we're going to put those together, right sides together, and we're just going to sew on the machine right the way around and leave this top section open, and I still sew that one 2 times. Now you can see there that I've sewn up that little foot, just turned it through, and I've just added some filling to the front of the foot there. So this section here is quite empty, and I have taken my felting needle and encouraged that all down the end and trying to get it to stay down there. Now I do add claws to these little ones just because it flattens the foot, and I think it's really nice. You could add claws to the front, but I prefer to leave them plain. I did on the other little one, but I think the back ones do need claws. So I've got my medium dowel needle with a single strand of 5-ply pearl thread this time, and I'm just going to dive straight in through there, and I'm going to come out in the center, and it's probably, it doesn't really matter, there's no real measurements here with this. It's just stitching in some little claws. It's probably about 1 centimeter from that top point, but we come in the center first, pull that knot through and pull that one down. Just make sure that you make it the same as your other foot. dive in there and come out underneath to create your next claw. It's important that while we're doing this, we're keeping up this tension. So we pull that one around, and we're going to dive in, and we're going to come out again the other side, to create that third claw. Pull that in, around again, dive in and come out if you can somewhere on that seam line. Remember to keep up that tension, and I've got those little claws all pulled into place. Keep up that tension, and all you need to do is just travel back and forth a couple of times, and preferably through that seam line, which is your strongest area. It will just anchor those stitches. Don't be pulling them in too tight. Don't want to distort the shape of your little foot. And when you feel satisfied that that tension is held, you can just dive in and out through that top and snip that one off. And you have your second little foot. Now what we're also going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and close that little opening with a blanket stitch with just my cream pearl thread. And then our next step is just to add our little completed feet to our body, and you can see there the positioning of those in relation to the base there, and they are just a little way from the end and just both pointing outwards on the same angle. Pin them into place, turn that one over, have a little look at it, make sure that you've got that little turnout is enough and that it's equal on both sides. And then I've gone ahead with my extra strong thread, and I've got it on my medium doll needle. I just find it easier to sew that way, and I've gone in underneath, hidden that first knot underneath there, and I'm simply going to sew across that little edge there, going back and forth into the filling, back through that little foot until that's very firmly anchored there. Travel across and do the same with that one. So those little feet are nicely stitched into place there, and now the final step with our bunny is to do our little tail, which is just that sweet little love heart. So all I've done there is taken my two pieces and just sewn them together, leaving a little gap opening in one of the straight edges there with a blanket stitch. And I've just stopped there, and then I've been able to add my filling, just a little bit of filling to plump that out with my forceps. I've gone in there with my felting needle again, tucked all those fibres in, and now all I have to do is just close that little opening by continuing on with my blanket stitch there. And then we will go ahead and add that little tail to the body. So attaching that little tail is just as simple as having a double strand of extra strong thread. I'm using my medium doll needle, I just find it easier. And I have actually started at the back through my button. So I've dived in through my button first, I've gone through that little heart and then into the body, across, back through the heart and out through the other side of that button. And we've got that all pulled in there, and you can also see that I've got that little button sitting on the lower edge of the heart, so that when we actually tie that and pull it in, that little tail just sits out just that little bit. So all I need to do is compress that all in and knot that off about 4 times and snip those thread ends. And that, my friends, is our completed little bunny. Little tail in place there. Very, very sweet. And I think she makes the perfect little Easter bunny. Wouldn't she look absolutely wonderful in a little basket surrounded by eggs? I'm sure some of you are going to do that. I certainly hope you do. And the only thing better than making one of these little bunnies is making 2 of them. Don't they look great together? They're so sweet. I absolutely love the grey, and I'm really looking forward to all of your different colours. And of course it's really nice with that little jointed head. You've got that lovely posability, makes all the difference, and it does make it easier to make. So I really hope you'll give it a go. Thank you for joining me. Well, I'm really happy with my second little bunny here. I'm happy with both of them actually, but it's lovely to have 2 in those 2 different colours. I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you have, you could give me a thumbs up. That would be absolutely beaut. Now, as far as stepping up a little, how did you go? Did you enjoy it? I hope I haven't scared you off. I don't want to scare anybody off. So tell me if you think that you're finding it too difficult, and any way that I can help. If you're loving it, then we'll do some more projects like this together. I do love working with you all. I feel like you're my little extended sewing family. And I'm enjoying every minute of it, I have to say. I hope you all are too. So make sure that you subscribe if you haven't, because you're missing out on all of the fun, and certainly all of the free patterns, because they're always going to be free. So many more coming up for you. Make sure you follow me on Instagram so that you can see all of those little patterns coming up at their first stages, little ones like this. And I'm hearing all of your requests, working on so many things behind the scenes. So everybody, keep on creating and keep staying safe and stay positive, and most of all, pay all of those great things forward. Until next time, it's Huru from me.